All right, people here, welcome to the last session of the day of day 2 of JNUC. Yay! Big party tonight, right? Everybody's ready for that? The big party tonight, everyone's ready, I hope. There'll be buses out front of the convention center here, which will bring you to the square where that is happening. Otherwise, you can walk. It's a bit of a walk, but it's a nice day, so pick your poison there. Not at the party, though. So, welcome to the stage, Kevin White, the creator of S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N.
Thank you, Kyle. Welcome, friends of Super, to Super Friends. As he said, my name is Kevin White. I'm the creator of S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N. So if you're unfamiliar, S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N. is it optimizes the Mac OS update experience. And S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N. is a backronym, Software Update Policy Enforcement with Recursive Messaging and Notifications. But because that's hard to say and harder to type, we just call it Super. So that's the name of the command, that's the name of the script, and that's what we're here to talk about. So what can Super do for you? It can manage the installation of macOS minor updates. It can manage the installation of non-system updates like Safari and Xcode command line tools. Can manage the installation of macOS major upgrades, and hopefully everybody here knows the difference between a minor update and a major upgrade. It's when Apple's marketing team gets high and comes up with a new name, okay? So, manage the installation of Jamf Pro policies. It can also allow you to have alternate workflows, like let's just say you want a computer to restart every 7 days. Doesn't really have anything to do with updates, you just want that to happen. And then you can also have temporary workflows that might only run once in a while or just once ever in that workflow. And so this is what Super looks like. And I'm an old school Mac head, and I remember when dialog boxes fit the factor of the screen that you're on, and so that's why I made Super look like that. I also, as an old school Mac guy, I'm not the biggest fan of Notification Center, so when Super does show a notification, it doesn't get lost with all your HomeKit notifications and whatever else ends up there, your Slack chats and your all things. No, they look like that and they stay on the screen until they are done. So that's a brief intro of Super, and I'm going to walk away from the stage here and let Keith talk about their experience with helping me create Super.
Hi, I'm Keith Spitzer. I'm a cybersecurity engineer with Mantech International. But what I actually do is I'm the Jamf administrator at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. I'm a government subcontractor, and I've been working with Kevin White since 2021. And I'm actually a Colorado native. I grew up about an hour west of here in Rocky Mountain National Park. And if you've got free time, I highly recommend that you check it out. So what are some of the unique challenges that I have managing my Mac environment? Almost every Mac user at JPL is smarter than I am. Some of them have multiple PhDs in computer science. These are the people that program the operating system to control the rovers on Mars, or are calculating the trajectory of satellites that are traveling millions of miles from Earth. So they're not the typical, oh, I just need to push a button user. They're the users that want to figure out what's going on behind the scenes and will tear apart anything that doesn't quite fit right. So that's where Super comes in at JPL. We needed a solution to update our 4,000 Macs. And we started working with Kevin back before Super was even a thing. We had a 300-line script to update our Intel fleet, and it worked great. And then Apple Silicon came along, and it changed the game for everything. So Kevin had started working on his ideas, and we started testing, figuring out like, okay, is this going to work for us? How do we do this? How do we upgrade? And how do we notify the users that they need to upgrade? And then we also were like, how do we get some teeth behind that? So that way it's not just a pop-up message of like, hey, it's time to update. And our users who are smart enough to go in and figure out what the process is to kill the window and all of that kind of stuff. We needed some teeth there to say, you know what? It's past the deadline. We're rebooting whether you like it or not. So we've been using Super since day one. Actually, we've been using Super since before day one when it wasn't even called Super. So it's been a great tool for us. And now I'm going to share a success story for you. So back in March, Apple released 15.3.2. And it was a fairly substantial update, but there was a few CVEs in the listing that said there was a known exploit active in the wild. And so NASA said all systems that are on Sequoia need to be patched no later than March 27th. So we had everything set up, Super runs in the background as designed, and it installs 14 days after Apple's release. That's the deadline that we set, and it works fairly smoothly. But it was a little bit different this time. What did deadline day look like for me? It was right in the middle of my daughter's spring break, and we already had a kayaking experience booked. So I wasn't going to be sitting at home watching the numbers like I usually do on updates. Not that I needed to do anything with those, but I didn't need to babysit it the way, maybe management would have liked. So I didn't actually check until 10 p.m. that night. We'd gotten through the day, and I had the urge to, jump on my phone and look at the numbers, or, text a colleague and say, hey, what does it look like? But I didn't. I focused on spending an awesome day with my daughter, and I didn't check until that night. When I did check, we were over 90% compliant on 15.3.2. Not 90% of just our Sequoia machines. We were 90% of our entire fleet was on 15.3.2. The threshold that we had been given was 90%, and I think I was at 93% that night, which was awesome, that I didn't have to do anything. And best of all, we had 0 calls to the help desk of people having issues with doing the upgrade. And even more important to me, I had 0 calls from management worried about the upgrade and what it meant for us. So Super has made it possible for me to just say, great, OS updates, not that big of a deal. I can focus on other stuff because I know that Super is running in the background and doing exactly what it's designed to do, exactly when it's designed to do it.
All right, Keith couldn't be here because of a family emergency, but I think that we owe him a round of applause, because without his concepts, Super wouldn't be here. So I think he'll really appreciate that. And I was actually lucky enough to visit him at JPL at the end of last year, and this backronym is literally a JPLism. JPL loves backronyms as well too, and that's where this came from. So Super's cousins were there for me to look at, and I got to go and visit and take pictures. And let's enhance. We've got Optimism and Maggie here with their backronyms. These are literally the cousins on Earth. I particularly love Maggie. It's like Mars Automated Gizmo for integrated testing or whatever. So that's where the Superman name came from. Not some DC fans here. It was literally a cool backronym for a fun project that we worked on together. So that's a little bit of fun. So requirements for Super version 5. So supports macOS 11 and newer. Supports Apple Silicon and Intel. And importantly, all non-credential, and the only thing that needs credentials is Apple Silicon, but basically all features of Super are supported on all platforms and all versions of macOS. So it's great that Apple's working on some new stuff, but if the new stuff requires that you're already on the almost new stuff, that doesn't help us get those old computers up, right? So every feature you see today works on macOS 11, 12, 13, 14, and 26. Okay, so Super self-installs when it is working from outside of its folder. So it is a big bash script, but if you run it from somewhere else, it will self-install itself, including obviously Jamf Pro. It also automatically installs the 2 dependencies. Super uses IBM Notifier for notifications and dialogues, and before you ask why am I not using Swift Dialog, the first bullet point, macOS 11. Swift Dialog does not support macOS 11, and I'm not going to code in 2 different dialog boxes for everything, so it's IBM Notifier, and it gets the job done. It does great work. And it also, if needed, will also run and download MIS CLI, because there are some workflows that require the macOS installer. So how do you get started with Super? Well, it's hosted on GitHub. Here it is. MacJitsu Super. You can probably also just Google Super or Superman Mac, something like that. And it is a big bash script. But it does behave more like a command tool and a background daemon. In fact, part of the self-install is that it's running a daemon in the background. It has some helpful commands built in, just like any good command. So, super -- usage will tell you if you like reading in the command line, it'll tell you the usage. -- help will send you off to the fantastic wiki. So I actually, just for those of you, there is a beta wiki that I posted an update to just this morning. And so it is up to date. It is not a final draft for the new version, but keep in mind that there are 2 wikis. There is the production wiki for old version, but new version, there's a beta wiki so that I don't break the old wiki. But that is linked on the releases page. So when you get started, after you go get it, you really should start with test mode. And test mode is literally super simple. Sudo super test mode. That puts Super into a mode where it doesn't actually apply any updates or download anything, but it lets you simulate the workflow and behaviors of all the rest of the Super options, and there are many. So you get to preview the dialogues because you can customize them. You also get to kind of get a feel for what your workflow is going to do, all without actually doing anything to the computer to make it actually update or restart. So I strongly encourage that you all, if you're getting started with Super, just download it, put it in test mode, start throwing commands at it, just to see what it does, right? And that allows you also to RTFL, read the fantastic Super log. And this is an important concept in Super. Part of the documentation is the logs. I used to write documentation for Apple, and when I wrote Super, I wanted a tool that had useful logging. In fact, I checked this morning, 25% of the code in Super is to give you a good log experience. So please, RTFL, read the fantastic log, please. I even have a screenshot of it, because look, it's in English. It's not in Programmese, okay? I spent a lot of time making sure the log is very human readable and friendly. So please, if you're new to Super, don't look, if you're scared of logs, start with this one. This one's G-rated, okay? It's super easy. It literally is, I try to make it as English readable as possible. So please check out the logs if you're getting started with Super. So Super's been around for a while, obviously version 5. And so I just last week, and I've been working on version 5.1 for the whole year. And don't just think that first number not changing doesn't mean it's a huge deal. It's proper versioning. You don't change the first number unless you break backwards compatibility. It's still backwards compatible. So, but I will tell you this, there's more new code in Super 5.1 than was in Super 5 from 4. So there's a lot of new features in 5.1. So full support for Tahoe, that's the baseline, right? Then, and so a couple weeks ago, and I was at Mac Evans PSU, and Kevin called me out. I was like, can you point out specific versions and target specific versions? No, except for the build that I released last week can target specific versions. So you can use full version numbers as a target in the new version of Super. And that includes updates and upgrades. Previous versions, you could only target a major upgrade version. Okay, more compatible with automatic software update. Just made a bunch of improvements there. We'll talk about that later. And more automatic deferrals. In fact, if you are confused as I am about the built-in Apple deferrals, then you can use Super's deferral mechanism as an alternate and then not have to deal with Apple deferral mechanism. More options for targeting non-system updates. That was actually courtesy of Norm, and he had those ideas. And then also even more troubleshooting and telemetry features, and something Norman's going to take us home with at the end, a new advanced configuration mode for doing some really cool multiple workflows. So what's the default Super workflow? Check for macOS updates. If none, then exit. New in Super 5.1, if it sees that you have automatic updates turned on, it will wait for that update to get cached before it forces it. But if it needs to, like let's say there's a deadline, it will force the download. Once the download's ready, that's when we actually prompt the user to either defer or restart. So Super never shows the user a dialog button or a dialog that's not going to lead to a pretty immediate result. So after, let's just say the user chooses to restart, after the OS starts back up, Super will automatically install non-system updates. And it does it in this order because there's a bug in software update where if you try to install non-system stuff first and then you want to try to install an OS update, it just basically doesn't work. So it does it after the fact. And then if you're a Jamf Pro user, it will automatically update the inventory and call for policies. And that's all just baked in. All right, so what can Super install? Well, the default is this macOS updates, right? But you can also target a specific update. And that can go 1 point, 2 points, or 3 points. It will always make the right decision. So if you don't give it 3 points to target a specific version, it will make the best decision and get the latest version of that middle point or that first point. Cool? You also have to tell Super to do upgrades. It will not upgrade unless it's told to. But then there's an equivalent flag to install a target version of the upgrade as well too. And again, this is new in Super 5.1, so please, everybody start using it. I know it's pre-release, but if I don't know it's broken, I can't fix it. So I need you all to test it. All right, so just keep in mind, if you are targeting a specific older OS version, this often requires use of a full installer. And that's due to a limitation in the macOS software update. It can only target 2 things. Whatever it thinks is the latest major and whatever it thinks is the latest minor. It cannot target any other versions. So know that if you use these with specific versions, it's probably going to download an installer. And that is going to be a slower experience for the user. Even after they click restart, even on the fastest Macs, it's 2 to 3 times longer than the over-the-air updates. So just know that it's there. And also, if you use MDM as your auth mechanism, it might not be able to work. Super will fail over for that because MDM can only target certain versions. All right, other installation options. Safari updates without restarting. You saw earlier how Super wants to install those after the fact. You can force it to install those earlier. And prioritize those non-restart items. So in other words, you can tell Super, I know there might be an update up ready, but I would rather you go ahead and pre-install Xcode command line tools before you restart the computer. So again, these are new in 5.1. This has been around for a while, install policy triggers. So if you like all those Super dialog boxes and deadlines, but you don't want it to do OS updates, you can just have it call a policy trigger for Jamf, because maybe that thing's going to restart the computer. If you like to use self-service, but you want to have Super, a button self-service trigger Super, you want to use the workflow install now flag. Because instead of Super asking the user, can I do something, Super just starts. Just goes. Workflow require active user. This is also new in 5.1. If you want to make sure that Super never does anything unless somebody's logged in, it's in the name, right? Because normally Super will try to update while you're at the login window, but you can force it to wait for someone. And then finally, last of the other installation options, just briefly, is restart without updates. That's if you want to do I want the computers to restart once a week. Okay? And here's what the cool thing about it is, you're still going to get all the same dialogues. They're very similar looking. So, for example, and I cannot see from down there, but I believe this is the Safari update one. This is what it looks like if the user is running Safari. If the user is not running Safari, Safari just gets updated silently. But if they're running it, they get a dialog. I quit Safari, open it back up again. I believe this is the I've asked the computer to restart dialog, which looks shockingly like the macOS update and upgrade dialog, and that's the point. And then this is if you start self-service, Super might have to do some checking first before it knows what to do, because maybe it has to download an update, go check for an upgrade. And all these dialog boxes are customizable. In fact, there's so many customizations, we don't have time to talk about all of them, but just know, we got icons, light mode and dark mode icons. We got unavoidance behaviors, like locking the whole screen, you can't move it around, all that kind of good stuff. We've got custom help and warning buttons in the bottom corner. We've also got custom display accessory area in the middle where you can throw in HTML or markup or videos or images or whatever you want in that dialogue. You want ginormous dialog boxes, we can do it. If you need to change the language, though, you're going to have to go into the code, because there's just too many variables there. But there is a function in the code. It's called set display language. It's got lots of comments. You go in there, you change whatever you want. That's the beauty of a bash. So, oh yeah, read the wiki. About that last one, just read the wiki. But here's what a crazy dialog box looks like. This is the one I made for Mac sys. Got all kinds of stuff that you can throw in there if you want to have big. And you can also see the backgrounds obscured. Yeah, all kinds of stuff can go in there. Moving on. So, concept of zero date. Zero date's basically when Super decides, well, that's the beginning of a workflow, right? So all your deadlines and schedules are based on this because we have to have a starting point. So for non-system items, it's whenever you started the workflow. For macOS upgrades or updates, it's whenever Super found it. Unless you use this one right here. I love this one, Mac admin SOFA feed. If you tell Super this, it will go look at that feed, and based on the target of the OS that you're targeting, it'll make that the 0 date, which is pretty cool. All right, so what if you're not quite ready for Super to start? Because that's the whole thing. When you run Super, it starts the workflow. What if you want to wait for that? Well, again, new features first in version 5.1. If you deploy Super super early on in your onboarding, like literally automatic enrollment, you obviously don't want Super to go. It's a bad time. So Super looks for the Apple setup done file now. And if the Apple setup done file is not there, meaning you're still in setup citizen, it's going to try again later. Just wait till later, right? So now it's safe to install Super literally as part of your onboarding workflow if you want it to kick in as soon as possible later on. Cool? Also, if you have a done file, I set this up a lot for my users. You want a specific done file because maybe you run like Jamf Setup Manager, right? Wait for Jamf Setup Manager to get done, then you can start. So that's another new flag in 5.1. Cool? And then if you are as frustrated by the Apple deferral config profile as I am, because it makes weird things happen, those you know, you can just tell Super, hey, wait 5 days. Right? You find a new update, wait 5 days, then start bothering the user to do it. Right? Again, all this is new in 5.1. Okay, deadlines. I've covered this before. This is like the first feature Super ever had. We have 3 kinds of deadlines. You can have count-based deadlines, like a number of times they've done it. You can have number of days, and then you can also just put in a hard deadline at the end if you really feel like it. Focus deadlines are sort of when you want Super to bust through things like Keynote or do not disturb. That's what a focus deadline is. And then we have the soft deadline, which is the dialog box that no longer lets the user defer, just they have to click restart. If you want to be hardcore, you get the hard deadline in there. There is no dialogues. It's all notifications. I'm doing the thing now. And you can mix and match all of these things to your heart content. You can have multiple types of deadlines, and it can get really confusing. I encourage you to avoid that, but if you want to do it, it lets you do it. So this is what a normal soft dialog, actually this is a normal dialog here, right? So they can defer, but you can see in the text it's a little bit different. It's got when they can defer till, right? You have so many counts and you have so many days. And then of course, at some point you'll get the actual hard deadline of, well, it's done now. Like you can't do it anymore, we're just gonna go ahead and do it, right? So let's say that you want something more like, I know when I want it to happen. That's what a scheduled installation is, okay? It overrides the standard deferral dialog because you've told Super, I want it to install at a certain point. And so for example, this one's the most like DDM, where you can say, I want it to install so many days after you have it, right? So you're setting I need it to install by then. Different than deadlines, because deadlines don't actually install at the end necessarily. And if you want to just read the wiki if you want to know the difference, but the idea is like, what if you want a completely unintended install where I never bother the user, I really just want it to go? That's what a scheduled install is. But you can actually let the user choose a schedule as well too, in the regular deferment dialog. So if you want the user to pick a schedule, not be bothered, and then it just installs at that scheduled time, we can do that as well too. Then also, what if you have maintenance windows and you don't want to bother the user? Well, that's what the schedule workflow active option is. And it's a really, I tried to make it as simple as I could, but you basically tell Super, hey, only bother the user around this time, right? Don't bother them at other hours. Only bother them on these active times. The other times, Super will not be bothering the user, okay? And when possible, because you can definitely have some conflicting logic here with your dates and times, Super will try to consolidate that as best it can. Again, read the logs. It'll tell you what it's doing, right? So read the logs for those adjustments to that workflow. So here's the normal Super dialog, but with the schedule option in the bottom. And the user will just click on that, and they'll pick from a nice little GUI thing. And again, this works with all your deadlines. So if you set a deadline, they're not going to be able to pick a scheduled install past the deadline. Right. And then this is the warning, so you can choose how often the user's warned. Hey, by the way, you're going to get this installation in a couple days, and you can repeat these as many times as you want. So, installing and configuring Super. Again, Super self-installs if it's run anywhere from outside of its folder. Okay, that's where it wants to live. The command options are saved to local files like regular plists. So it's a little bit different than a regular command in that when you run super, you can give those what you want it to do, and it remembers that to a plist more like a regular app does. Secrets are saved to the keychain. If you give super secrets, they go to the keychain. Again, more like a regular app. And then because Jamf Pro is limited to 8 parameters in the policy, you have other options like config profiles to deploy to super as well too if you want. So, one recommendation for Jamf Pro, if you haven't already disabled this, you should just disable this in general. You should not be building inventory with Jamf Pro's legacy collect updates. There's bugs there. There's better ways. So just turn that off if you're going to use super. All right, so this is a typical deployment of super in Jamf. You make a policy. You give super some keys in the policy parameters, and it'll go. So you can be straightforward and basic with super. Just because super does a lot of awesome stuff doesn't mean you have to use it all. But if you want to, super does have a config profile that it can accept. And I would only do this if you want permanent settings in super. If you want to do the stuff that Norm's talking about later, where you're having different workflows, do not put those in your config profile. Only put things you want to be permanent in there. The preference domain is com.makjitsu.super. And read the wiki. So check out example MDMs on GitHub. So there's a big example MDM. There's also some other documentation in there. Screenshots, all the kind of stuff is in the wiki. But here's a tip. The correct number of settings in your super config profile is the least required. Okay? It is not the best method to configure super for many people. It is a method, but it's not the best method. That's the number one thing we see on the Slack channel is people putting too much stuff in this config profile. But here's what it looks like. I prefer this method where you actually go in here and edit it. But I want to give props to somebody. Tony, I'm calling you out right now. This is Tony Young, y'all. Right here, stand up. This is the guy keeping the Slack channel alive. And he's the guy that provides the JSON. If you prefer looking at a lot of dialog boxes in Jamf, that's what you want to do. So there is a schema if you prefer pop-up menus in Jamf for your config profile. So some other ones there, a managed login item config profile. If you want to make sure the super daemon can't be shut off, that's also in GitHub. And then also some recommended settings for automatic software updates. Specifically, I would enable everything except for the actual install. And that's new in 5.1, including downloads, right? So yeah, in 5.1, turn on automatic downloads. It's usually a better experience, okay? Optionally, you can disable the software update notifications if you don't want to confuse the user with the built-in notifications and also super notifications. And so real quick with DDM. DDM, it's the future, but until yesterday, there was not a Jamf API that was worth it. So that's how much time I've had to think about that. Moving on. So here's the managed login item. Again, these are all on the Wikipedia page. You can download them, but basically this just keeps super from being disabled by the end user. And then, again, you probably have seen this one before. Yes, we want you to turn on everything except for the actual install, because you want to make sure that super's sort of gating that for the user. And then also, if you want to prevent the end user from seeing those Apple notifications, you can hide that with a notifications config profile. Okay, so native software update deferral, super does recognize them. So if you do push down a native software update deferral, super will adhere to that. Again, not DDM style, the legacy style. No DDM support yet here, okay? So it will only let you target things that the OS doesn't think is deferred. So we will not override that. So my general recommendation these days is, because Apple has a very unique point of view about when things are deferred, don't use it. If you can get away with just using super, if you want to use super, get away with using super's native deferment mechanisms, and then you'll come up with less problems. Let's put it that way, okay? All right, so, and again, here's what an Apple deferment profile looks like. I actually do like to do it this way. That way I can see all the keys, because I guess I'm just a nerd like that. But like I said, I would recommend not deploying this. All right, Apple Silicon authentication. This was what kind of started the problem. So here's the deal. If macOS updates and upgrades require authentication, okay? Now, S.U.P.E.R.M.A.N has an authentication dialog. It's going to have to ask, but the good thing is you have control over it. You can configure the look and feel. Here's the other cool thing. It looks the same on every version of Mac OS. Because again, if S.U.P.E.R.M.A.'s running it, it all looks the same. This is a key that I added in a previous version of S.U.P.E.R.M.A.. Hey, just ask the user once, save the password with the keychain, and then S.U.P.E.R.M.A. doesn't have to ever ask the password again. Simple, right? So this also is what allows for scheduled installations. We can't have scheduled installations if S.U.P.E.R.M.A. doesn't have something to restart the computer with from a credential standpoint, okay? User's passwords from the keychain. This is what the authentication dialog box looks like. It looks like the rest of S.U.P.E.R.M.A., kinda, right? Now, if you don't have a saved authentication method or your authentication fails, it's going to look like that again too. So, but again, every version of every Mac OS that S.U.P.E.R.M.A. supports looks the same. And also, it doesn't matter what the target is, an update, upgrade, whatever, it always looks like that, right? Alternately, if you're in a more managed environment like a lab environment, you can actually hand credentials into S.U.P.E.R.M.A. You can literally tell S.U.P.E.R.M.A., hey, here's my local admin account, use that to authenticate. Or you can hand into S.U.P.E.R.M.A., I want you to create a service account for me. Use my admin credentials, but don't save them. Make a random service account and save that away later on too, okay? Just keep in mind, other admins will be able to see these keychain items, right? And we can't put this in a config profile for obvious reasons, because people can see config profiles. So you hand it into S.U.P.E.R.M.A. when you configure it, okay? And of course, we've got also the Jamf Legacy API at this point, where we can hand in our authentication to the Jamf API so that Jamf can then using the now Legacy API, send down the MDM push command. I'm not going to get into what the permissions need to be for this. That's what the wiki's for. And I would also recommend, because the Legacy MDM method is fraught with many, many perils, that you should definitely also use that key so that when the MDM profile or the MDM flow fails, it fails over to user authentication. All right? And so that's what this looks like. You're literally handing in your creds back to Jamf Pro in S.U.P.E.R.M.A. It saves it into the keychain.